Hey you, yes you right there, stop what you're doing right now because the leaks for Black Clover's newest chapter are out and trust me, you don't want to miss them. Yes, that's right, after what feels like forever, even though it was only a 1 week break, we are finally back with the leaks for Black Clover chapter 351. And this is definitely a chapter you don't want to miss because in this chapter, we are going to be diving into the backstory of both Yosuka, the self-proclaimed strongest member of the Ryuzen 7, and Ryu, the Shogun of the Land of the Sun. And we're finally going to be answering the mystery behind exactly how Ryu lost his Yoryoku and gained his all-seeing eye. Okay, so the chapter title is With the Shogun of the Land of the Sun. The chapter opens up and we see Asta use Zen on the dragon with his anti-magic, but it regenerates. Meanwhile, Yosuka is still fighting Heath, telling him his technique is only flashy and that's it. Heath says he cannot lose for the sake of Lucius creating a right world. Yosuka says, of course, from your point of view, it's only natural that you think you're right. Yosuka tells Heath he doesn't know his shogun slash general, i.e. Lucius, but he'll defeat him for the sake of his own shogun. Then we jump into the flashback and we find out that Yosuka was the heir to the Koshu, one of the provinces in the Land of the Sun, and he's been the strongest since childhood. There was nobody who could fight him on equal terms from the 5 provinces, except for Ryu, the heir of the Koshu. They used to fight with their katana in a friendly way to see who was more fit to become the shogun. There was a plague, epidemic, something like that in Koshu and Goshu, and people were dying. There was a danger that the 2 provinces were going to be annihilated completely. Some people began saying that the only thing that could possibly heal the epidemic was an herb called the active soulgrass that had gone extinct, and began questioning how are they supposed to find something that was supposedly only a folklore. The scene then cuts to a new place, Tengentsu, the clairvoyance ability that Ryu has in the current day, the power that lies in this land. It's an all-seeing eye that only the likes of Yosuka and Ryu have the Yoryoku to obtain. However, the price to pay for that person who obtains this Tengetsu is that they lose all of their Yoryoku. Yosuka thinks to himself, indeed, it's amazing to be able to see through everything, but there's so much you can see in the world. What's the point of this and not having any Yoryoku? The only thing Yosuka, as the strongest, was afraid of was losing his Yoryoku. Yosuka would have let the weakest of the weak die instead of losing his Yoryoku, betting on something he can't find out for sure. However, Ryu immediately says if that's all they want in return, his Yoryoku can be taken. Yosuka asked Ryu if he was an idiot and didn't care about becoming the Shogun anymore, but Ryu managed to find the herb and save the people with the power of the eye. Yosuka was annoyed as his opponent essentially quit, but Ryu continued to save the people without changing a single bit. More and more people continued to admire and follow Ryu. When the time came to pick the next Shogun, the leaders of the Land of the Sun, the feudal lords, were saying that Ryu indeed is amazing, but he has no Yoryoku, and Yosuka is the strongest. But Yosuka declares that Ryu is the next Shogun. We then cut back to Yosuka versus Heath, and we see that Yosuka uses Iron Yojutsu, Iron Warrior, and defeats Heath with one punch, telling him that he is the strongest. The other members of the Reason 7 get up and declare that they must keep fighting. Ryu declares that they'll all defeat the dragon together. Yosuka says that the strongest is actually Ryu. Yosuka says they'll make a man out of Asta who aspires for the same heights as Ryu. And a chapter, no break next week. Yeah, so as you guys can tell, this is definitely one juicy chapter because we're finally diving into the backstory of Ryu and finding out exactly how, despite being one of the strongest people in the Land of the Sun apparently when they were kids, he ended up losing all his Yoryoku in exchange for gaining his Tengetsu. And to find out that he gained his Tengetsu in a moment of self-sacrifice, giving up essentially his lifelong dream of becoming the next Shogun of the Land of the Sun in order to save the people who were dying around him, just encapsulates and perfectly describes exactly what kind of character this guy is. He's a natural born leader who is willing to do whatever it takes to protect his people. And this goes to show exactly why the members of the Reason 7 are so loyal to Ryu, because he's the exact embodiment of what someone who holds the title of Wizard King or Shogun should actually end up being. Someone who's willing to sacrifice everything, their lives and even their own dreams, in order to protect the people they're in charge of. And I mean, on top of that, he's also a very charismatic guy, but the most important thing is that he puts the needs of the people who live in the Land of the Sun above everything else, above his own dreams and above his own life. And exactly why, at the time, Yosuka was not suited to become the next Shogun, because to Yosuka back then, and I would argue to a lesser extent in the current day, strength is the only thing that matters. And that's the reason why at the very end of the chapter, he says that Ryu is the strongest one out of all of them, because unlike Yosuka, Ryu had the strength to give up his dreams in order to save his people. Now, the other thing worth mentioning is in the beginning of the chapter, we apparently see Asta struggling with the five-headed dragon. Not power-wise, because we do see that Asta is apparently overpowering the dragon and actually managed to cut off 2 of his heads. But we do see the dragon is actually still regenerating despite the fact that the beast paladin has been defeated already. And that's very interesting because that means that the dragon's ability to regenerate is not a magical ability, it's just a natural ability that the dragon has, which actually does make sense because the dragon is most likely based on the mythical creature, the Hydra, which has the ability that when one of its heads is cut off, it has the ability to regenerate it and grow a new one. Which means that Asa's anti-magic Zen will not be enough to take down the dragon by itself. Sure, he'll be able to cut off its heads, but they'll just keep regenerating. But since we see at the end of the chapter that Ryu and the Region 7 members, minus Ichika, will be backing Asta up in the next chapter, more than likely we will get to see Ryu using his eye ability, his Tengentsu, to figure out exactly what the weakness of the dragon is, and once he does, we'll see all 8 of them work together to take out this legendary beast once and for all.